Good morning, this is Dr. Justina Agnieszka Szewaj. I just woke up and I know that I have to provide this very important message for you. In the United States, I've had an impression, knowing by now quite well and in detail what it means to be remotely targeted using satellites and using other equipment as a victim. I've had many times an impression of two things. First one is that persons, despite having utmost willingness to participate in a professional activity with me, and that would result in a great benefit, would let me know that that was the case on the side or secretly, and then avoid it at all cost, especially in public, or pursue my degradation that would not benefit them for sure. That's one. So self-sabotage was sabotaging me in the name of non-selective survival. There is no other, so you have to understand. And so what I understood, being a target in a coma city, is that this is possibly done by being targeted, and that is going to sound very strange, as a planet. I looked and looked across of the United States for reasons why, I have it's only 2 minutes, why we would behave in that way. And it makes, now that you have all those prior videos, it makes no sense other than persons, each of us, to the extent that I've experienced that, we are inflicted as if slaves torture. And that torture is associated with first non-visible and then visible use of radiation that ends in tissue damage, such as visible on melting, as if you would use heat to melt a device, melting, as well as an intent to override organ systems to kill us. And less evil to it is to isolate persons with whom collaboration would be beneficial for non-selective survival, and the same is true for romantic relationships. I've had over now various years had any impression that persons, now you need to understand this, I was happily married, however that marriage was when the marriage vow fails, and person, like I've mentioned, pursues harm to you, or death, or such by omission, or such are results of manipulation, when it is visible as a result of that person being harmed, and you were harmed as well, and it sounds selfish, okay? It sounds selfish, but at worst you actually pursue the harm of that person only in mind, and in person you would always pursue that person's well-being. It ends up with a realization that that person has had someone else that was for that person, based on natural law, more important, which is normal. And that is not a person from early childhood, that is a person who at some point was most loved and pursued children with that person in sexual act, and that is remembered. So that person, even though that person loved me, at best could bond with me at very deep level of love, that is very needy love, that is like love to proteges, friends, etc. but that when sex is pursued at the level of pursuing children, ends up with aggression or demeaning to avoid that sexual activity, where people are unable to divorce. So person basically have had someone else and was unable to pursue it. It is common, it is sometimes marked that those persons are dangerous. It is not true, it's just that the person cannot have less, and for as long as there was a missed window of opportunity to pursue that relationship, the prior one, at fault of one or another, window of opportunity, you got me right. Regardless of the marital status of that person cannot commit to another person unless that other relationship ends in a de facto true physical and therefore also in freedom of pain, de facto rejection, meaning out of all creatures in this universe, if I desire someone to have children and it is reciprocal most as an instinct of loving that person, that is reciprocal also, I will pursue in the same amount of harm that person when it makes sense to, in anxiety, in reflex, to check on and in life-saving maneuvers first, because that's how adults are constructed, and that is true for all of us. And so that tells us, because it cannot be purposefully inflicted, but it tells us in circumstances when it is not, who has in mind someone else. And some speak then of generation of spies. Spies never, per to my best knowledge, those that are avowed are or have contracts. Spies, per that information on mind, also then ones, are not based on contract, but those are persons who have relationships, and because of non-selective survival for international needs, and now I'm gonna say something that will sound strange, intergalactic needs, are forced to work until there's enough safety, as if slaves, for free or not, to pursue the wanted relationship, and often it becomes like during the Second World War, my grandpa, who had one wife and then married another woman, it becomes not ethical because you fall in love with someone else and it is real, or it becomes not possible because that person will develop resentment because tortured or harmed, you did not pursue or pursued harm to that person. You lost faith in that person. And this is a message because I've met out of character acts, for instance, reporting de facto true acts of terrorism. A person or skipped acting on it. A reporting, for instance, being kidnapped, I was ignored. Many instances of such things. That creates an impression that we are being occupied. So a person visibly cares for me, however does not take any action professionally. That's one example. And in romantic relationships, person visibly wants to engage in a relationship, marry or pursue children, but person is unable to divorce and targeted to be killed or tortured, like I was at least. And that leads me to a now good news message, ladies and gentlemen. This is a very good news message. And listen to me carefully, including all of targeted individuals. Also persons who actually impede access to those videos, because I know that material of Robert Duncan, when I was in medical school and working at later on at the university in medical school, I was unable to pursue it because I was forced to work, or at least pretend that I am doing a question bank. I was not pretending, I was trying to solve it, in fact, so that I can do those videos, and so that we have, as humans, the number one in the universe level of progress and development, and we just work on implementation, which is the goal of all of that material. And so that, I believe that I, in my area, have achieved and extrapolated to all other areas enough that all of us, if we have if you have access to those videos, you can use my share to have more than if there is any other, and listen to me carefully now, if there is any other more developed prior to that culture that alike with African America seemingly so, or with German Nazis seemingly so, and I can explain, I know that atrocities I also was tortured happened, pursued the mess and harm of persons, not only about animals, but also I want you to know history from books have been distorted in many times. And so if you will be unable to watch it, do not worry. It means that you have to deserve to not be targeted mentally, and that is called microwave radiation by some. There is no microwave in front of you, but if someone else is tortured, that will arrive to you as pain de facto lived together with that creature or person. And so you have to work then specifically determining which humans and animals, as if a cluster connected to you, based on survival. Survival is always non-selective to benefit, which means if you suffer, it means that collectively you are suffering because you can help the other ones and self at the same time by that suffering. Suffering has no otherwise purpose. It is horrid to be inflicted. But when the distribution of suffering, natural what happens, that is the concept, okay? And so do work on prevention. Remember, do no harm first, prevent pain. And make sure that persons do not, you do not target to inflict pain to then do something good, because in skips we remember that. But at the same time, remember also to be tolerant, and know that persons often were seemingly pursuing harm, but in fact there were many relationships, for instance, which the kidnappings from videos of our grandparents, which men, and now understand psychology here, many of you may know that, but may not realize, like when I was reading Dr. Duncan's material, I couldn't read it because I had to work in pain that was tough to actually raid and find source of. I was able to read it afterwards and understood that when that happens, you are already working on implementation, at least of parts of what I'm doing, as information, and then you will read and corroborate and work on details, and that's it. And so I researched in person, empirically, that material, and so that is why I want you to know there are colonies out of Earth in the universe that, as if slaves, treat us humans and make other humans also to extort work. And that is a report of one military that he was, when he pursued actually relationship on YouTube, I found it, with a friendly relationship with a couple of aliens. The couple of aliens immediately said that that person was incapable to treat well children, and also that he was dangerous, and attacked an assumption of pursuit of sexuality, which means the lack of knowledge that we do now on sexuality, and he was teased with a long distance teaser, attacked. And so that you need to remember. Now we know better than them. Whoever they are, we know better. That information is often dismissed as being sick when spoken about. There is a huge archive in New Mexico that I went to, and festival for aliens. Even though they don't appear, they are around. And there is, I purchased some of the technology. There, most of the technology is not sufficient. So some persons and agents felt that I spoke, ex-FBI agents, for instance, one in Germany, felt like that is futile because he still has movement disorder, and he is still targeted. And he says for radiation used in, for instance, the old boats, like boats, in those boats, in the very, very thick radiation that goes through walls, that he cannot protect himself even in thicker buildings. So that is true, but you need to know that it happens because he has to work and take an action, and it will cease inevitably. There is a limit for sure, if he does it, and that's true for all of us. That's one. Secondly, we have the best, I have no doubt about it, information, most developed one out of universe, and a non-selective survival applies to all of the universe, which means if we make progress enough that in non-selective way any cluster of planets or planet will follow the same progress in non-selective thriving, and that slavery will end. And secondly, this is an ultimatum, because there were also relationships, romantic one like that, I were prevented from. There will be no videos if you blackmail me to war.